Hey everyone, I'm Case Aiken, and with the new book, Eberron Forge of the Artificer, coming out right after we just got Heroes of Faerun, uh, and the Book of Asterion, um, we're bathing in content right now. We are swimming in it. It is doing quite well, and I thought I would take a look at some of the player-facing options that are in the book. Now I have had I have access to it via the master subscription, and so I've been able to see this for a little while. But we just had Thanksgiving, and it was hard for me to really sit down and do a recording. But I wanted to start, and I wanted to talk about the. I'm going to start talking about the feat in this game. The I think that from all the player-facing options, these are the ones that are really interesting that I haven't seen as much conversation going on online about. And so I just wanted to turn our attention here. It's one that I've thought a lot about in terms of some of these feat and how they would be applied. Yeah, so let's just take a look at the feat. As per usual, I will have the text over my shoulder for the content, and we're just going to go down the list. We're going to start with the origin feat, which are Dragonmark feats. These are, in general, part of the Dragonmark backgrounds that are available in this. I'm not looking directly at the backgrounds because I think backgrounds are kind of... they've become just pick the feat and you happen to get the ability scores with it, or vice versa. It does create a balancing act for things. With the Dragonmarks specifically being feat now as opposed to species the way it was in 5e, I am intrigued at some of the possibilities here. It does feel a little bit like a feat tax, but it's a feat tax that you previously didn't get a feat as an option for, so it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. In that, I find it interesting that it opens up some potential access to Dragonmarks to characters. I find it weird that it's no longer locked by species. I don't know why. It's just, while I understand that Wizards of the Coast is moving towards a more open and inclusive, kind of flexible ability to build out your characters, it does still feel weird to me that there isn't even in the description of the backgrounds a note about which species typically is a member of those respective houses, just because it is a larger family structure and used to be a really baked in thing about Dragonmarks. But that said, the idea that because you have a Warlock dip and you take lessons of the first one, that you can manifest a Dragonmark and maybe have it be even a Dragonmark from a different species is, it makes a lot of sense to me. That actually doesn't bother me. So, it's... Human already covers so many of the options in this because of the way that half races no longer exist. So all of the half elf races, you could just claim that you are playing a half elf, but you are playing a human, in mechanically speaking. Even though there is the Korvar option that is in this book, and I'll talk about the species that are in this book in the next video. But right now, I just want to look first at the feats. I think that the backgrounds are, generally speaking, what they anticipated the feats being associated with, and aren't necessarily the most interesting ones, but generally you can make a worthwhile character regardless of the class that you're trying to do, because there's a decent spread of abilities that the backgrounds are enhancing. Anyway, Dragonmark feats. Let's talk about them. We open up with Aberrant Dragonmark. Now, this used to be one of the few Constitution-heavy feats in the game, and now this is an origin feat, so it no longer gives that benefit to Constitution. It's still a Constitution-based feat, however. This is the Dragonmark for if you just want to manifest a random mutant power that is something sorcerer-esque. In nature. You get Aberrant Fortitude. When you fail a Constitution saving throw, you can take a reaction to roll 1d4 and add the number rolled to the save, potentially turning the failure into a success. Once you've used this benefit, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. So this is a once per long rest Constitution saving throw bonus that isn't particularly big. This isn't much. The bigger thing that we get is Aberrant Magic. You know, one cantrip of your choice from the Sorcerer spell list. Also, choose a level 1 spell from that spell list. You always have that spell prepared, and you can cast it once without a spell slot. And you regain this every short or long rest. That's interesting right there. And the spellcasting modifier is Constitution. That has always been the interesting part about the Aberrant Dragonmark. It has been a way that you can have Constitution be your direct attack stat. And now with True Strike being so much better in 5.5, you could theoretically make a character like a Loxodon who is entirely true, like a Loxodon Rogue, for example. You could be entirely Constitution based. If you single class, you wouldn't even necessarily need to have anything else for your attack stat. You could just have Constitution, and that would cover your attack stat, your health, and your AC. That would be quite good. You could have all of that, and then you get a spell that you also can use as your Constitution modifier. Obviously, this is only going to be great on a martial character. It's going to be okay on a non-martial character. And so if you happen to have a higher Constitution score than you do your casting stat, then this is good. And then they get Aberrant Surge. When you cast the level 1 spell from this feat, you can expend one of your hit point dice and roll it. If you roll an even number, you gain a number of temporary hit points equal to the number rolled. If you roll an odd number, one creature within 30 feet of you, not including you, takes force damage equal to the number rolled. If no other creature in range, you take the damage. Yeah, so this is your rider effect. It adds a little bit of chaos magic to it all, adding that you do a little bit of damage or you get a little bit of temp HP depending on what you roll when you expend a hit dice. Obviously, if you have a bigger hit dice, it's going to be more impactful, so those barbarians actually can get something out of this, although obviously they're not doing this while they're raging. And you can do this whenever you cast the level 1 spell from this feat. It doesn't say that it has to be from your method without spell slots. So if you have a character who has a decent amount of spell slots and a good con score, you could make use of this pretty frequently. But as this is, the really interesting part is being able to get a cantrip and a spell that key off of your Constitution modifier. And it comes from the Sorcerer list, which feels appropriate for this specific feat. The Sorcerer list feels like, oh, here's wild manifestations of magic and how that all works. So yeah, I think, especially as an origin feat, this is perfectly fine. I think it keeps up with Magic Initiate. The fact that it keys off of such a random spell stat as a Constitution really makes this very, very tempting. Aberrant Fortitude is a ribbon that will come up. I'm sure it will come up every single day, but it is still a ribbon in terms of how big of a benefit it's going to apply for your character. And Aberrant Surge is potentially interesting. It does add a positive random effect to your character. In positive, I mean from a gameplay standpoint, but yes, it's strictly speaking positive for you unless you happen to roll an odd number and there's no one in range of you, which I guess would happen if you're playing this as a ranged character. So it kind of depends on what first level spell you pick. It's interesting, and can potentially have some benefits in combat. I think the fact that you're getting Constitution as the casting stat is the most interesting part here, and is for very specific builds a really tasty feat, and for a lot of other feats it's not going to really matter. Then we move on to the Mark of Detection. When you make an intelligence, investigation, or wisdom check, you can roll 1d4 and add the number rolled to the ability check. See, this is the characteristic of all of the other marks. They get some kind of d4 bonus to a skill or two. I wish that Aberrant Dragonmark was just always on, because it's very powerful. It's to Constitution saving throws, but it's only a d4, and the Aberrant Dragonmark is supposed to be wildly powerful, but very specific. It definitely doesn't get all the other benefits of the traditional marks. So they also get magical detection. So as with all of the mark spells, they get some variety of spells that they always have prepared and that they can cast without a spell slot, and that is from a very small pool here. Back when this was species instead of as feat, this was a feature that wasn't clear if it was added to your spells, your abilities to cast, and that is no longer the case. That, as with design in general in 5.5, if you are able to cast a spell in some capacity, if you have spell slots, you're able to cast it further. That's just the way it works in 5.5, unless it's like a feature that doesn't use spellcasting in any way, and it's like a completely out of the box way. I'm thinking like the Shadow Monk's ability to spend focus to do spell like effects. But that's really the only example there. Anyway, so with Mark of Detection, they have Detect Magic and Detect Poison and Disease always prepared, and you can cast each spell once without a spell slot, and you regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. You pick the casting stat when you take the feat, and when you reach level 3, you also have See Invisibility prepared and can also cast that in the same way. So this is 3 spells that you're getting, and they're all really nice. Detect Magic and Detect Poison and Disease are both going to be cast more often as rituals as opposed to by way of not spending a spell slot or spending a spell slot. I guess like you'll once per day be able to cast it faster, which is nice. See Invisibility you get, and that, like, I can't tell you how many times I have kicked myself for not having this spell prepared. I know way too many DMs who just love it. So these make sense for the Mark of Detection. And if you have the spellcasting or pack magic feat, you also add the following list of spells to your list. So every one of these Dragonmark marks all give you a list of spells, and these are a 2 spells of levels 1 through 4, and then 1 spell at level 5. And notably, unlike the way it was when they were species, because now it is definitive that the spells that you get as part of your magical whatever feature, like the powers of your mark that you can cast without spell slots, now these are different spells. There used to be some overlap, not a ton, but there was some, which made it sort of clear that you only were getting these extra spells added on. But so for Mark of Detection, for example, we get Detect Evil and Good, Identify, Detect Thoughts, Find Traps, Clairvoyance, Non-Detection, Arcane Eye, Divination, and Legend Lore. This is, of course, a really good espionage-focused kind of class, or maybe not espionage, detection based list of spells. The only question I have is who is the best class for this list, because I think these are all already on the wizard list, for example, so there's no real benefit there. I'm shockingly thinking like a paladin, like an Oath of Vengeance paladin would probably get a lot out of this. Now, one of the things that's interesting about these mark feats is that they add these spells to your spell list explicitly, which means that they are interesting for the conversation about artificers, which are also introduced in this book. Now, artificers have an ability called Spell Storing Item, which allows them to store a spell up to level 3 and cast it up to their intelligence modifier per day times 2. So on a class as intelligence focused as the Artificer, we're talking about 10 free castings of a spell per day, potentially not even by them, since there's so many ways for artificers to hand off the spell storing item to a familiar or a homunculus or the battlesmith's steel hound. So there's so many ways that they can just use the spell, and so we because it is up to level 3, but it doesn't scale or it doesn't upcast the lower level spells. We're talking about a level 3 spell. That's the big buff to the Artificer in this book. And so looking at the spells of the mark, we also need to look at the 3rd level spells specifically and see if that's really worthwhile for an Artificer. And Clairvoyance is certainly interesting. Non-Detection, I don't imagine you'd be casting 10 times per day unless you were in a very espionage focused kind of game where you're really, like, I could see the mission where you would use that 10 times, but I can't see that necessarily all the time. Clairvoyance, I could see a very interesting way of using it 10 times a day. But yeah, this is not the overwhelmingly like great mark for artificers. But still, like it's a good list to add available to any class that you happen to be playing. Like I said, it just I think this is better on a divine caster, just because I think they have less access to some of these spells. So next up is the Mark of Finding, and this one was originally supposed to be the Ranger-focused feat. It is unfortunately not a good choice now that the Ranger is as focused around Hunter's Mark as they are, because this makes a good chunk of the features on this class feat less valuable for Ranger specifically. However, it still is sort of keyed that way and hasn't changed dramatically. That said, it's not a bad feat and has a good list, but I think it would be more interesting on a class that is not a Ranger, and coming from House Thrashk, like that that background specifically gives you bonuses that are very Ranger kind of buffed. But I can see this being useful on like a cleric build, or like I said, a paladin would probably get some benefits out of this one, or like a sorcerer. I could see going much more natural with their vibe. And Hunter's Mark now works with spells, so that is potentially interesting. So on that note, what do they get? So when they make a Wisdom, Perception, or Survival check, they add a D4. Okay, a D4 on every Perception check is a notable ability, especially on a Scout type character. Hunter's Mark is always prepared, and you can cast it once without expending a spell slot. It tells you pick the casting stat, but it doesn't matter for Hunter's Mark. When you reach character level 3, you always have a locate object. Okay, so now that is a interesting note here, which is that we're only getting 2 spells. Now, one is a direct combat spell. So that is, sort of showing how they weigh the abilities here. But then we get the spells. So we get Fairy Fire, Long Strider. Then level 2 is Locate Animals or Plants, and then Mind Spike. Level 3 is Clairvoyance, and then Speak with Plants. Level 4 is Divination, and then Locate Creature. And level 5 is Commune with Nature. So this is a very rangery list. Again, I don't think a Ranger gets much benefit out of this feat, but it is a feat to take if you want a character to play like a Ranger that doesn't actually have any Ranger levels. And I think it does pretty well at that. You're just probably avoiding your Ranger or your Druid levels in terms of trying to open up your spell slots. But yeah, there's nothing that's necessarily that bad here. There's nothing that is worthwhile for Artificers, I should note. Clairvoyance, again, is the better of the 2 options, and that's a very specific kind of play if you're playing an Artificer who needs to cast a spell 10 times a day. Hopefully you've got a different 3rd level spell from your subclass, if that's the case. Moving on to Mark of Handling. This is House Vidalis, and this has always been one that's been interesting from the metagame scenario of how do you interact with animals in the game. And House Vidalis is always been all about making really good pet-focused classes. And so let's take a look here, because I think despite the fact that there's going to be quite a few spells that aren't really that interesting to like a Druid necessarily, the actual class features matter. So when you make an Intelligence, Nature, or Wisdom Animal Handling check, you can roll 1d4 and add the number rolled to the ability check. That's pretty cool. Those are 2 really useful and tell the story of what this Dragonmark is very much about. You always have Animal Friendship and Speak with Animals spells prepared, and you can cast those without a spell slot, and you regain on a long rest. And again, you can pick the spell casting stat for these. I don't think it matters for either of them. Monstrous Connections. This is a cool feature they get outside of spell casting. When you reach character level 3, you can target a monstrosity when you cast Animal Friendship or Speak with Animals if the creature's intelligence score is 3 or lower. And that opens up all kinds of monstrosities in this game, like things like owlbears or griffins. So all of a sudden you can do Speak with Animals with these creatures and communicate with them, and you've got access to some potentially pretty dope animal friends. And then they get spells of the mark. So we get command and find familiar. Find familiar is a really big one there. Obviously not one you care about as if you're playing a wizard, but if you were playing just about anything else, that's going to be huge. Beast sense, calm emotions. Beacon of Hope, Conjure Animals. Conjure Animals is an interesting one and potentially worthwhile for 10 castings a day. Conjure Animals has been changed a lot from its 5th edition format. Now it functions more like a Moonbeam kind of thing. So that could be an interesting spell to have 10 castings of per day. It's interesting, at least. They get Aura of Life, Dominate Beast, and then they get Awaken. And Awaken is the spell I really wish you could target monstrosities with, but you can't. That would be incredible if you could target any monstrosity with an intelligence of 3 or lower. But as it is, this is a good list, and like I said, it's going to be a little bit favoring what you could already do with the Druid, but it gives you some nice things in return. The ability to target a monstrosity of intelligence lower than 3 is huge. You can definitely do some cool stuff with that. So yeah, that's the Mark of Handling. Mark of Healing. So this is House Jurasco, which is traditionally a halfling house. So this one is you get medical intuition when you make a wisdom medicine check or an ability check using an herbalism kit. You can roll a 1d4 and add the number to the ability check. So that is 1 skill and 1 tool. All right, that's that's fine here. Healing Touch, you always have Cure Wounds. Cure Wounds has gotten better in 5.5, so that's a nice little buff here to the feat as opposed to the species. So they have Cure Wounds prepared, and you can cast it once without a spell slot, and you regain every time you finish a long rest. And you pick your ability score modifier. This actually does matter because it changes how powerful the cure is. And then when you reach level 3, you also always have lesser restoration. So you're only getting 2 spells here, but they are both impactful spells. When you need it, it's going to be great to have it, and it's good to always have these prepared on a character. If you have the spellcasting or pack feature, you get the following spells: False Life, Healing Word, Arcane Vigor, Prayer of Healing, Aura of Vitality, Mass Healing Word, Aura of Life, Aura of Purity, Greater Restoration. That is a huge list of healing spells. Like, I think this is obvious. Like, if you're playing like a wizard or a sorcerer, this is an incredible way to just have access to all of the cleric healing spells that you could possibly want. If you're trying to play a designated healing character. And that is an interesting list of spells to throw onto a character. Likewise, you could take this with a warlock and easily pick that up. You could do both because of the way that this applies spells to every cast list, or every caster list that you have. So if you have a warlock, like a warlock sorcerer multi-class, you would add these potentially to both classes. Not that you would ever need to do that on a spontaneous caster like that, but it is an option. So yeah, the Mark of Healing I love. It is very distinctly saying, like, okay, any other casting class besides clerics, here's all the cleric goodies. In a way that I find very appealing. I think that this is really useful for staking out an identity of a character. It does mean that clerics have very little use for it. Like, a life cleric is getting most of this baked in, and getting some additional perks to all that. But that doesn't really matter that much, ultimately. This is a strong feature for especially arcane classes to get a bunch of healing spells natively. So yeah, it's a strong list. Again, like, a life cleric doesn't want this. The alchemist artificer doesn't want this because they've got a bunch of life spells baked in. Your healing focused subclasses aren't going to benefit from this, but your classes that don't care about healing, that you just want to throw some healing onto, could get a lot out of this. So yeah, so Mark of Healing is a lot of fun, and like I said, on like a wizard especially, like a really fun character option. Mark of Hospitality, the other halfling house. When you make a charisma persuasion check or an ability check using brewer supplies or cook's utensils, you can roll 1d4 and add the ability to the number to the ability check. Okay, so you get a bump to persuasion, which is nice. The brewers or cooked utensils, I don't know what ability checks you're making for those that often. But, I guess for fluff reasons, you might be a cook character. Like, I have a character that has the chef talent, and so I play up it, but I usually play it as persuasion in that, or performance, pardon me, in that way. So you could certainly make use of this, but those are lesser roles for it. The Mark of Hospitality is generally not as tasty of a mark for me, but let's see if that's changed. You always have the Purify Food and Drink spell, and you have Unseen Servant. Unseen Servant's interesting. Spells prepared. You can cast each without a spell slot, and you regain them on a long rest. Intelligence or Charisma. It's your spellcasting ability for these. Yada, yada, yada. At level 3, you also get Calm Emotions. Okay, those are all useful. Unseen Servant is the most interesting here. And then spells of the Mark. You get Goodberry and Sleep. Goodberry is fantastic. Sleep is great at level 1. It doesn't scale it that well, but it is it's really good when you would pick this up initially. And Goodberry is just a great healing spell to have at your beck and call. Aid and Enhanceability, those are both really useful spells to have in your quiver. Nothing is standing out so far for me. Create Food and Water. Okay, this is super useful when it comes up. It's extremely useful. Same with Goodberry for that matter. If you have a DM that's a stickler for those kind of things on travel situations, this is a good way to get around it. And Leomund's Tiny Hut. That is a fantastic spell. It's going to be a ritual spell, so this is not a spell that we're talking about. Neither of these are spells to talk about for the Artificer 3rd level ability, but Leomund's Tiny Hut is a fantastic spell, and if you're a class that doesn't get it, welcome. You've now got a really dope way to protect yourself for all of your rests. Or you can do really creative things with it in combat or otherwise. I once used Leomund's Tiny Hut as a diving bell because it explicitly says that the environment inside is temperate in whatever you set it at. And nothing can come in that isn't permitted. So I was able to just use it as a diving bell, and we just dropped down to the bottom of the ocean and were able to look up a thing. Anyway, Leomund's Tiny Hut is a very cool, very versatile spell. It's going to be a ritual whenever you cast it, but it's a great spell to have in your list. Aura of Purity, Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum, more of these good things. And then Hallow. Okay, yeah, so it's the Aura of Hospitality. You're a character who's really good at being hospitable for your allies. This is a good buffing list. A good, I probably would say this would be a pretty decent bard list. Just to throw out there, or maybe. Yeah, bards would have a lot of fun with this. Paladins would get something out of this, especially with Leomund's Tiny Hut being something that they could cast as a ritual. Now that everyone can cast rituals, it's however this is not the most. It's very hospitable, but it's not. It would be great to have in the real world, I guess, is the thing. It's less useful in the game. Because a lot of the things that it sort of takes care of are things that like not every DM is really stressing about most of the time. Like DMs are going to vary in terms of how much they care about like you tracking your food and liquid intake. But if you're in urban environments or so forth, it's usually assumed that you have access to a lot of these things. So it's difficult to say like how often that's going to be a real factor in your games. But certainly anytime that you're in those kind of hostile environments, it's going to be really useful. And yeah, it's worthwhile. It's just not the flashy one. Whereas one of the flashy ones, the Mark of Making. So this is House Cannith. They are traditionally the creators of the Warforged. And this is the artificery of artificery Dragonmark houses. The mark is so they get Artisan's Intuition. When making an Intelligence Arcana check or using Artisan's tools, you can roll 1d4 and add the number rolled to the ability check. An ability check using Artisan's tools. I'm guessing that doesn't include any sort of spell effects, but that is interesting right there. Then the Mending Cantrip, which is good to know. Artificers now always know the Mending Cantrip, so that is kind of redundant. You always have the Magic Weapon spell prepared. You can cast it once without a spell slot, and you gain the ability to cast it when you finish a long rest. Yada, yada, yada. Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. And then we get to the spells of the Mark, and these are really good spells. Identify, Tensor's Floating Disc. Tensor's Floating Disc is great. Continual Flame is interesting. Spiritual Weapon is great. Conjure Barrage is a fantastic spell if you are looking at a Artificer and you're looking for the spell storing item spell. Conjure Barrage has received a huge upgrade in 5.5. It is better than Fireball considerably. It has no friendly fire, and it does comparable damage in a bigger space. So that no friendly fire is a huge part of it. So yeah, that's a great spell right there. They also get Elemental Weapon, they get Fabricate and Stone Shape, and then they get Creation. So yeah, Spiritual Weapon stands out to me as a really good spell on a lot of builds. This spell list is really good if you're playing an Artificer. We'll say that. Mending and Magic Weapon are kind of redundant, so the rest of the feat feels a little bit like a feat tax if you're taking this to, say, play a Cartographer who wants to have a decent spell storing option. But it's a good list for the Artificer, and we'll get into how it feels less like a tax shortly. So then we've got the Mark of Passage. I like this one a lot, and we're going to get into why in a moment. It starts off strong with a boost to your speed of 5 feet. When you make a Strength, Athletics, or Dexterity Acrobatics check, you roll 1d4 and add that number. Most classes only care about one of these two, but you're going to care about one of these two, and so that's going to be great. You always have the Misty Step spell prepared. You can cast it once without a spell slot, and you have the ability to do so after a long rest. You can also use any spell slots for it. Okay, so you're only getting one spell, but that spell is Misty Step, which is fan-fucking-tastic. Like, this is doing a lot of what the Fey Touched spell, or Fey Touch feat is giving to your characters, but as an origin feat. So this is really nice. Then you get Expeditious Retreat and Jump as first level. Then you get fucking Fine Steed and Pass Without Trace, but fucking Fine Steed. Fine Steed is so good now. It is incredible, and I have to tell you that this is this is an artifact of the species from 5e where Fine Steed was just not as good. It was good, but it wasn't as like comically good as it is now, especially if you can cast it at higher level spell slots, and it's a second level spell. Like, Paladins don't get it that early, but if you're playing any other class, you're getting that so goddamn early. You get Blink and you get Phantom Steed, and Phantom Steed almost feels redundant when you have Fine Steed on your list, but Phantom Steed is also really good as a ritual. Just get a super fast rocket horse. That's really nice right there. You get Dimension Door and Freedom of Movement, and then Teleportation Circle. So this is an incredible spell list. I just have to rave about that. You're also getting Misty Step thrown on there. That is fantastic. You're getting a bonus to a crucial skill, either Dexterity with Acrobatics or Strength with Athletics, and you're getting that bump to speed. This is a fantastic list. It is... there's so many good classes for this. I can't even say which one is necessarily the best. Really, as long as Misty Step isn't just part of your kit already. So I guess, but Fine Steed is there, and so even like an Eldritch Knight or like a Wizard is going to get something out of this. Like, Fine Steed is so good right there. And getting early access to that, and having Misty Step always prepared is great. So yeah, this is just a fantastic feat, just a stellar feat. Can't recommend it enough. Mark of Scribing. Gifted Scribe. When you make an intelligence history check or an ability check using the calligrapher's supplies, you can roll 1d4 and add the number to the history check or to the ability check. Okay, so your history or your calligrapher's supplies. Cool. Again, not as useful a list there. The message cantrip. I do really like the message cantrip. I think it's underrated. I think it duplicates a lot of the effects of telepathy. I think that's a really worthwhile cantrip. You always also have the Comprehend Languages spell prepared. You can cast it once without a spell slot, and you regain the ability when you finish a long rest. Okay, Comprehend Languages is good. Like, that's good to have. It is a ritual, so that's going to be something that you can always like bring up when you need to. So that's cool. And then from level 3 on, you have Magic Mouth prepared and can cast it using a spell slot if you need to, or cast it once without. Magic Mouth is one of those cool spells that people have figured out how to make like a computer work inside the realm of the game by way of having on-off states with it. So that's pretty cool. But I would say the features of this class or of this feat are less impressive. Let's get into the spells. They get command, illusory, script, animal messenger, silence, sending, tongues, arcane eye, confusion, and dream. So I could see using sending as a messaging system. It is going to feel redundant unless you're very far apart from each other when compared to message. But for a campaign where your characters are spread out, an artificer could really get a benefit out of sending. Tongues you're not going to cast very frequently. Meanwhile, the rest of this list, I think this is a relatively underwhelming list. Yeah, these are good spells, but they're not flashy. Moving on to the Mark of Sentinel. When you make a Wisdom, Insight, or Perception check, you can roll a D4 and add that number to the ability roll. Perception is great, and Insight is fantastic. And they're both Wisdom skills, so this is great right there. You always have the Shield spell prepared. That is so good. And you can cast it once without a spell slot and regain the ability when you finish a long rest. Shield is great. That is a lot for a character. Again, it has the rider about Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. You don't care. Vigilant Guardian. When a creature you can see within 5 feet of you is hit by an attack roll, you can take a reaction to swap places with the creature and you are hit by the attack instead. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus and regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. Okay, this is competing with Guardian's Shield. It's competing with your Shield ability. But for a character who's supposed to be a bodyguard, like that's the Mark of Sentinel is the house of being bodyguards. That makes a lot of sense right there. All right, Vigilant Guardian, you can do this at proficiency 9 times per day before a long rest. Okay, so a certain 2 to 6 times a day, are you necessarily going to want to step in the way and take damage? You might if you are playing a character who doesn't have access if you're playing a character who is stepping in the way and taking that damage. If you're playing something like a paladin or an Eldritch Knight, paladin really likes this, and so do rangers. They really like this because of shield, and because of some of the other things on here. And that D10 HD is going to make a difference in terms of stepping in and taking the hit, especially since you can't do anything to mitigate this because it's already using your reaction, and you take the hit. So take of that what you will. Spell-wise, you get Compelled Duel, Shield of Faith. I like Shield of Faith a lot. I think it's underrated. Warding Bond, Zone of Truth, Counterspell, and Protection from Energy. Unfortunately, neither of these are really great options for a spell-storing item. But hey, we've got a pretty good spell list so far. These are good spells to have. Death Ward, Guardian of Faith. Guardian of Faith is great. Bigby's Hand. So some really solid spells here. I think this is a flashier list with some really obvious abilities that are really useful. I think Vigilant Guardian is probably the thing that's going to get used the least, just because how often are you going to directly be standing next to someone who you want to take the damage from? But for the right character in the right party, this could be used quite a bit. And I think that this is a really good mark. Mark of Shadow. This is the only one that has 2 backgrounds that go for it, because the Mark of Shadow infamously had a split. The family split in 2, and now there's 2 there's 2 Shadow Elf families in Eberron. These are again traditionally elves, but now it doesn't really matter. Although I don't know. We'll talk about this feat. When you make a dexterity stealth check or a charisma performance check, you can roll 1d4 and add the number rolled to the ability check. Okay, this is good for either an assassin or a performer. That's sort of the 2 different groups here. You know the minor illusion cantrip, and you have the invisibility spell prepared. You can cast it once without a spell slot per long rest. You always have intelligence, wisdom, or charisma as your modifier, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so invisibility, they obviously weigh as being a very impactful spell because you're casting it because they're only giving you 1 spell and they're giving you a cantrip. Let's also go down the spells. Disguise Self, okay. Silent Image, okay. Darkness, Pass Without Trace, Clairvoyance, Major Image. Major Image you might want to do a bunch. Clairvoyance, again, we've talked about how you could use it as a spell storing item. Greater invisibility, hallucinatory terrain, and mislead. I think that this is a perfectly fine spell list, but I am not entirely sure who this is for. I guess the Trickery Domain Cleric, but I think there's a bunch of overlap on spells. Certainly the old Shadow Sorcerer has some overlap here, but is that too much overlap? I can't remember without looking it up. I don't know who is the best the best class for this. Maybe a Gloomstalker Ranger would be useful for this. The Mark of Shadow is a subtle list, and so I apologize for not being as hot on it. I think that you could certainly make use of it. Again, all of these are useful. They all have the potential to be some of the best feat in the game. Certainly the best origin feat in the game. And that is just part of the Dragonmarks as they are. They're fantastic, and so the ones that are less good are still good, just not as dramatically so, at least in ways that I can immediately clock. Let's move on to the Mark of Storm. This is another one I really like. So when you make a Dexterity Acrobatics check or an ability check using Navigator's tools, you can roll 1d4 and add the number to the ability check. This is really playing into the fact that these are like your ship guys. These are known for being either at sea or in airships. And I can imagine if you're playing in a game where you're on an airship or sea or a boat, you're going to need to use Navigator's tools fairly frequently because your DM's going to insist on that. Meanwhile, they have the resistance to lightning as damage. They just have resistance to lightning. That's awesome. They have the Thunderclap cantrip that is changed. That was the Gust cantrip when this was a species. This is obviously a more impactful spell for them to have here, especially because when they reach character level 3, they also have Gust of Wind spell prepared, and they can cast that without a spell slot, and Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma is their spellcasting modifier, yada yada yada. All right, so the resistance is the big deal of the features of the feat, and then we get the Mark of the Storm spells. So they get Featherfall, Fog Cloud, Levitate, Shatter, Sleet Storm, Windwall. Those are good spells, but those are not good ones for a spell storing item. They get Conjure Minor Elementals. That is going to ring a bell for a lot of people in the optimization community. I believe that got nerfed in errata, but the Conjure Minor Elementals spell still is really good. And on a class that doesn't natively get it, so like if you are playing... I'm trying to think of a good multi-attack, like I guess if you're playing like a Warlock for example, and you need, you get a bunch of attacks because of Eldritch Blast, that's useful. The scaling isn't going to happen because of Warlock, the way Warlock spellcasting happens. I guess a Valor Bard would be the best example here, because they could probably get that before they would get Magical Secrets online. Regardless, Conjure Minor Elementals is great. It's an incredibly gishy spell. It's a real cool option. Control Water, also good. And then Conjure Elemental is not as a dramatic change in power. Conjure Minor Elementals just scaled so remarkably fast. But this is also a really good spell list. It's not great for... like I said, for the Artificer that's looking to pick up something to be a level 3 spell, but resistance is huge. Thunderclap is a nice cantrip to have. Gust of Wind is useful, and then that spell list is pretty good. But that resistance is the main driver on this one. And there's just story reasons, because if you're in Eberron, you want the Mark of Storm so that you can control airships. So yeah, there's that too. Then lastly is the Mark of Warding. When you make an intelligence investigation check or an ability check using Thieves' tools, you can roll 1d4 and add the number to the ability check. Okay, that's really useful. This is obviously great for a rogue kind of build. You have the Alarm and Mage Armor spells prepared. You can cast each without a spell slot, and regain one once per long rest. Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma is your stat for this. And then at character level 3, you also gain Arcane Lock and also can cast that without a spell slot. All right, this is, I think, particularly useful. I think an Arcane Trickster Rogue is going to really get a benefit out of those abilities. Let's look at the spells that they get. They get Armor of Agathis and Sanctuary. They get Knock and Nystel's Magic Aura. They get Glyph of Warding and Magic Circle. Neither of those really stand out to me as particularly good for an Artificer, by the way. They get Leomund's Secret Chest and Mordenkainen's Faithful Hound, and they get Anti-Life Shell. Okay, again, I think that this is a pretty good rogue one. And here's why. I think that the Dragonmark feat are some of the best feat in this game. I think that they give access to a variety of spells, which could be really useful to any class in the game. I think that they give potent abilities on top of that. I think that they are competitive and arguably better in some circumstances with Magic Initiate. And I think Magic Initiate, the way it's been revised in 5.5, is one of the best origin feat that you can select. So I think that we have a really solid set of feat here. And then what's really weird is that we have the greater mark feat, and these are all universally bad. I'm going to say that before we get into any of these. There are niche cases where you might want to take one for some reason, and I'll look at all of these and explain which ones have those niche cases. But generally speaking, these are bad feat. They are requiring the feat tax of that previous Dragonmark feat, and they don't do that much in addition, except for Potent Dragonmark. And I'm going to talk about Potent Dragonmark before we get into the others because it's that good. So Potent Dragonmark increases the ability score used by your Dragonmark feat, which is going to be a mental stat. So this is a caster feat. And you always have the spells on your spells of the mark list prepared. So regardless of how many spellcasting classes you have, you always have the spells of the mark prepared for that. I wonder if that means that you can cast spells of a higher level if you have multi-classing that allows for you to have access to those slots. I'm not sure, actually. Because the language here is kind of weird. You do have those spells prepared, and you do have the spell slots to cast from them. So you might be able to cast higher level spell slots than you would otherwise if you were a multi-class. There's only so many circumstances where that would really matter, but it's interesting. And then Dragonmark spellcasting. You have one extra spell slot to cast the spells granted by your Dragonmark feat. The spell slot is half your level round up to a maximum level of 5. You regain the expended spell slot when you finish a short or long rest. Short rest. And you can use the spell to cast only a spell you have prepared because of your Dragonmark feat or the Dragonmark preparation of this feat. So for any of those classes that had a good spellcasting list, this is a packed magic slot. This is scaling up with your character level. And so at level 10, or rather at level 9, you have a 5th level spell slot that regenerates on a short rest. This is an incredible feat. And in conjunction with many of the Dragonmark feat, this is a fantastic choice for any character who has a caster focus at all. This is a fantastic choice. This is so good in conjunction with so many of the feat on this list. Anyone that I highlighted that they have a good spellcasting list is great, but even if you don't, this is still a crap ton of spellcasting added onto a character. It is, yes, a feat tax compared to something like Fey Touched, but it is not this. It pairs really well in a way that is incredible. And so Potent Dragonmark, before we go into any of the other general feat in this book, I just need to shout that one out, is just being truly great. And the rest of these are just not up to snuff with that. So Greater Aberrant Dragonmark. Increase your Constitution. There we go, that Constitution bump to a maximum of 20 by 1. When you use the Aberrant Fortitude of your Aberrant Dragonmark feat, you can roll 1d6 instead of 1d4. Whoop-de-doo on a once per... Oh, and you can use it now short or long rest. That makes it slightly better, but this should have been always on, and doesn't change that this should be always on. If anything, make that previously per short rest and now make it always, because it is such a minor benefit. Mark of Inspiration. When you cast a cantrip, you roll 1 or 2 of your unexpended hit point dice. You gain a number of temporary hit points equal to the number rolled plus your Constitution modifier. And one creature of your choice within 30 feet, not including you, takes force damage equal to the number rolled. Those dice are then expended. You can use this benefit a number of times per day equal to your proficiency bonus. You'll gain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. I don't know why they tie this to proficiency bonus uses when it's already locked to your hit point dice. And you have another feature that's tied to your hit point dice. So you, in theory, are spending quite a few of these, and like that's never going to be very much. I don't know why they're gating this off. This is not worth a feat. It, like, if you just need to bump your con score by 1 and you just need some benefits, like they exist here, but they're few and far between. I think Aberrant Dragonmark is an interesting feat. I think that this is an unexciting follow-up to it. And is unfortunate because there is no like really good follow-up to Aberrant Dragonmark, since Potent Dragonmark doesn't interact with it in an interesting way. Greater Mark of Detection. Again, any ability score... increase one ability score of your choice by 1 to a maximum of 20, so any ability score. Okay, cool. When you use the Deductive Intuition benefit, it becomes a d6 instead of a 1d4. When you use Magical Detection benefit of your Mark of Detection to cast See Invisibility without a spell slot, you can choose one creature you can see within 30 feet of yourself. The creature also gains the benefit of the spell for its duration. So it's just an extra casting of See Invisibility. I guess that you're both benefiting from... So there's that, but yeah, like this is a really minor feat. Greater Mark of Finding. Increase one ability score of your choice by 1 to a maximum of 20. Improved Intuition. When you use the Hunter's Intuition benefit of your Mark of Finding feat, you roll 1d6 instead of 1d4. Okay, these are at least better skills that you need it, but still. When you use Mark of Finder's Magic benefit to cast Hunter's Mark without a spell slot, the range of the spell is doubled, and you can modify the spell so that the target can't benefit from the invisible condition for the duration. I think that this is so close to being actually worthwhile. The fact that you have to cast it without a spell slot to gain these benefits is dumb. It's bad enough that this is a Hunter's Mark focused feat, but to make it so that you could stop anyone from going invisible is potentially quite good. But the fact that you can only do it on a once per long rest spell that you're probably not looking forward to casting anyway, like you gain no other benefits to it. Again, just the Greater Mark feats just typically are just not doing much for me. Greater Mark of Handling. Increase one ability score of your choice by 1 to a maximum of 20. Okay, again, still good. That's any ability score. When you use Wild Intuition benefit of your Mark of Handling feat, you can now roll 1d6 instead of a 1d4. Again, the same for all these. Potentially interesting for this one based on some of the other stuff. I will say that this is actually one of the feat that I think is interesting because improved handling. When you are mounted, immediately after you hit a target within 5 feet of you, or within 5 feet of your mount with a melee attack roll, your mount can take a reaction to move up to its speed or take the attack action to make one attack only. So normally with a controlled mount, you can't make attacks with them. So this gives them the ability to make an attack. And so if you're building something of an uber mount, then you actually have a decent ability to do something with that. That's actually pretty cool. I could see this being really useful, and especially if you're building around getting a monstrosity as your mount because of your animal friendship stuff, that's pretty cool. I could see this being stacked on stacked in a way that would be really useful. Then you also get Subdue Animal. As a magic action, you can exert command over one beast or monstrosity you can see within 30 feet of you. Target must succeed on a Wisdom saving throw, DC 8 plus your Wisdom modifier and proficiency bonus, or have Frightened condition until the start of your next turn. You can use this benefit a number of times equal to proficiency bonus, regain on a long rest. All right, Frightened condition. This is like Frightened condition is useful. It would almost, considering some of the other feat that we've seen recently, it would make sense for this to be at will as opposed to proficiency bonus, especially because you're locked into your wisdom save. Why is it a wisdom save? Why isn't it whatever casting stat? This is the same problem that one feat from Heroes of Faerun had, the dragon touched one, that made it a wisdom save, or a wisdom saving throw based on your wisdom modifier, and that sucks. That sucks a lot. But the improved handling is really interesting. I could see this on a very mount built character, getting a lot of benefit out of that. So yeah, I could see that as being really useful. Greater Mark of Healing. Again, ability score increased by 1. When you use Magical Intuition, it's 1d6 instead of 1d4. You can now use the Healing Touch benefit of your Mark of Healing feat to cast Cure Wounds without using a spell slot a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, and you regain all uses when you finish a long rest. Alright, that's potentially useful. A bunch of castings of Cure Wounds is useful. Additionally, when you cast Cure Wounds and roll dice to determine the number of hit points restored, you can treat any 1 or 2 on a roll as a 3. In terms of your average, this only bumps it by like 1 or 1.5, but it is a bump. And this is on all castings of Cure Wounds, not just the one that you get from this. And the fact that you get a whole bunch of extra castings from this. Like, I could see this being worthwhile. Like, it's not necessarily the most worthwhile feat, but I could see it being worthwhile. On a very healing focused character. It's not the worst choice, especially. Well, and it scales with your character level, so it's not the worst choice. It could really make your healing a lot better. It stacks. This does stack well with a Life Cleric. Of course, the Mark of Healing doesn't. So I don't know. You could make something out of this. It's potentially worthwhile. Moving on, Greater Mark of Hospitality. Again, increase 1 ability score by your choice, maximum 20. Improved Intuition whenever you use the ever hospitable feature from the Mark of Hospitality. It's a D6 instead of a D4. Again, all the same. These are all the goddamn same. When you cast Purify Food and Drink, you can modify the spell so that instead of the normal effect, each creature of your choice within 30 feet of you is refreshed. Each affected creature's exhaustion level is reduced by 1, and the creature gains temporary hit points equal to your proficiency bonus plus your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma modifier. Choose it when you select this feat. When you modify the spell with this benefit, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. Okay, so that's the removal of exhaustion is really nice, and I could see that being useful in a party with like a bunch of. I was about to say a bunch of berserkers, but that's not even how that works anymore. So I don't even know. I mean, it's certainly useful. The Mark of Hospitality is really good for the real world, and not necessarily as logical for the D&D world. And that continues with the Greater Mark, which I don't think that this is a big benefit. Like, the exhaustion level is huge, but especially with Purify Food and Drink. And temp HP, that's all really nice. It's really nice, but is that worth a feat? And I'm not sure about that. Greater Mark of Making. Increase 1 ability score of your choice by 1 to a maximum of 20. Improved Intuition. When you use the Artisan's Intuition benefit of your Mark of Making feat, you can roll 1d6 instead of 1d4. Whoopee. Improved Making. When you use the Spellsmith benefit of your Mark of Making feat to cast magical weapon without a spell slot, you cast the spell as its level 3 version. Okay, This, again, I just don't think that these feat are that worthwhile. Like, a level 3 version is nice because it gives you a +2 to your weapon attack. But that's still, like, not that much. And it's only a bump to your... Like, you're not getting extra castings of it. Like, I don't understand why these feat are so bad. Greater Mark of Passage. Increase 1 ability score of your choice by 1 to a maximum of 20. When you use the intuitive motion benefit of your Mark of Passage feat, you can roll a d6 instead of a d20 or instead of a d4. When you use the magical passage benefit of your Mark of Passage feat to cast Misty Step without a spell slot, you can also choose up to 2 willing creatures you can see within 30 feet of yourself before you teleport. Each creature can then take a reaction to also teleport up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space it can see. Okay, so this is sharing your Misty Step, but it costs a reaction to 2 characters. Again, I don't think this one's that worthwhile. Even with the great Mark of Passage, I don't think you're getting that much of a benefit. It's beneficial, sure, but it's not a huge benefit. And so continues to be kind of a bummer here. Greater Mark of Scribing. Again, increase any ability score by 1. Gifted Scribe benefit of Mark of Scribing goes to 1d6 instead of 1d4. When you cast Comprehend Languages, you can modify the spell to encompass up to 3 willing creatures you can see within 30 feet of each other. Each creature also gains the benefit of the spell for the duration. In addition, for the duration of the spell, you and the creatures can communicate telepathically with each other while within 1 mile of each other. Once you modify the spell with this benefit, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. All right, that's huge. Like, when using it, is it worth a feat huge? I'm not sure, but it is very big. Because you can all of a sudden make a situation where, because the problem with Comprehend Languages is it doesn't apply to everyone involved. So now you can make it so that everyone involved can understand each other. That's big. And communicate telepathically, also huge. Again, is this worth the feat? I don't know. I don't know. This one, it's a big thing, but I don't know if it's worth a feat. Greater Mark of Sentinel. Ability score increase, yada, yada, yada. Sentinel's intuition is now a d6 instead of d4, yada, yada, yada. When you use the Vigilant Guardian benefit of your Mark of Sentinel, you can also make 1 attack with a weapon or unarmed strike as part of that same reaction. Okay, this is interesting as a bodyguard kind of maneuver. You can, as part of the reaction of stepping in to make an attack, or to take the damage for an ally, you can also make an attack as part of it. I could see this being really useful on a bodyguard character. You're getting proficiency bonus uses of this reaction. You're making the least feature of the Mark of Sentinel potentially worthwhile. So if you already have it, I could see this being worthwhile. I guess that's what I'm getting at here. I could see you making use of it if you already happen to have the Mark of Sentinel and you just need to bump an ability score. That works okay. And you're already a character who's prone to taking the Mark of Sentinel in the first place. I wouldn't take the Mark of Sentinel to take this feat, but like I said, if you already have the Mark of Sentinel and it's a good feat, then it's worthwhile. Greater Mark of Shadow. Increase 1 ability score by your choice to 1. Improved Intuition. When you use Cunning Intuition because of your Mark of Shadow feat, you can roll 1d6 instead of 1d4. When you use the Shape Shadows benefit of your Mark of Shadow feat to cast Invisibility without a spell slot, you can cast the spell as its level 3 version. Okay, that's just a few extra people that you're casting it on. I don't think that this is worth it at all. Yeah, I don't think it's worth it. It'd be one thing if it was making it so that you cast greater invisibility, but it's not. It's just an upcasting of invisibility, which again is extra people, but it's just that's not worth a feat. Greater Mark of Storm. Increase 1 ability score by 1. Cool. Windwright's Intuition increases from a d4 to a d6. Cool. When you use the Storm Magic benefit of your Mark of Storm feat to cast Gust of Wind without a spell slot, you also gain a fly speed of 60 feet for the duration of the spell. I wish it was whenever you cast Gust of Wind. That would be cool. The fact that it has to be without a spell slot. This is, however, Flight, and Gust of Wind is a second level spell. So fly for it, and you're getting it for a minute. That's not terrible. Again, I don't think it's worth a feat, but this might be worth it if you already have Mark of Storm, which again is a decent one. By that metric, I don't think Mark of Passages is worth it. Anyway, so Greater Mark of Warding. Increase 1 ability score of your choice by 1 to a maximum of 20. When you use the Warder's Intuition, yada, 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 it becomes a d6 instead of a d4. Improved Warding. When a creature makes an attack roll against you or a creature you can see within 30 feet of yourself, you can make a reaction to impose disadvantage on the roll. You can use this benefit a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus. This should just be at will. I get that it is comparable to the light cleric's ability to as a reaction use their solar flare ability, but this is a big imposition to be a feat. I mean, keep in mind, I guess it's within 30 feet, so that's good. But like the protection fighting style is this, but better. So that, and it is unlimited uses. So that's where I'm getting at in terms of like, is this necessarily worth proficiency bonus, and is this worth a feat? This is not that bad. This is this is not that bad. I could see taking this feat if you already have it. But again, all of the greater marks are only worthwhile if you already have the marks in place. There's no reason to like be looking at them as part of the feat chain. It only makes sense if you're already taking the base mark spell, and then potentially you're going to want to take the potent Dragonmark spell first, or potent Dragonmark feat. So yeah, I mean, Potent Dragonmark is just such a great feat. It makes almost any one of these substantially better. And the ones that are already good, it makes way better. So I just need to shout out Potent Dragonmark as just being the best. Now, it is favoring casters, whereas the Greater Marks feats all favor any ability score. So that is true. But you know what? The Dragonmark feats are really meant for casters anyway. Like, there's a benefit to being a non-caster, but way more likely you're benefiting from this as being a full caster or half caster, and that's just the way it is. Moving on, we do have one epic boon feat. This is the Sybaris Dragonmark, and so this has no prerequisite aside from being level 19. And then you gain one ability score of your choice to a maximum of 30 now, as is the case with most epic boons. And then Aberrant Magic. Choose a level 8 or lower spell from the Sorcerer's spell list, or a spell list from the Sybaris Dragonmark spells table. The table includes Dragonmark's suggestions if you'd like to associate one with an existing mark. You always have that spell prepared. You can cast it once without a spell slot or spell components, and you regain the ability to cast this way when you finish a short rest. You can also cast the spell using any spell slots you have of the appropriate level. You pick the casting stat when you take this feat. All right, so basically it's any sorcerer spell. The Sybaris Dragonmark spells that they suggest are animal shapes for handling, control weather for storm, demi-plane for making, hero's feast for hospitality, maze for warding, mind blank for sentinel, plane shift for passage, project image for shadow, regenerate for healing, symbol for scribing, teleport for finding, and true seeing for detection. But really, it's the point is that you get to choose a level 8 sorcerer spell, and you get it every single short rest. And that is a pretty good feat. That is worth it as an epic boon. That it just is. It's a worthwhile epic boon. So yeah, those are the feat that were available in Eberron Forge of the Artificer. I just wanted to talk about those first because I was really interested in those. I think the backgrounds are less interesting, and hopefully custom backgrounds are going to become more popular as this goes on, just because it's so locking character concepts to link the background part to the ability score increase to the feat. Just because things like, like we said, like the Mark of Finding, for example, like that is really tailored for a ranger, but isn't very good on a ranger. And the fact that the feat sort of assumes you're a ranger or a druid is just kind of unfortunate. But again, I think that the Dragonmark feats are fantastic. I think that all of them have the right situation where they're going to be useful, and several of them stand out as being among the best origin feat you could possibly take. And certainly some of them have really big benefits for classes like the Artificer or like the Warlock, for example. There's plenty of classes that are really going to like this. And then Potent Dragonmark is a really good feat, especially if you're already considering taking a Dragonmark feat. It just really makes any Dragonmark work so much better. The greater Dragonmark feat are not particularly good. And then the Sybaris Dragonmark is really good. So we've got a lot of good origin feat in here. I think that as the game's meta is maturing, the origin feat are turning into some of the really exciting areas of game design. The greater marks are just not worth it, and so that's an unfortunate area where you see some of the limitations of game design. I don't know what you could have done aside from make it so that each one was locked to. I would have rolled the benefits of the Potent Dragonmark in there and just not have the benefit of the extra spell, just because I find that so good. That's so strong. But yeah, the greater marks are not really worth your time unless you're already locked in, and even then it's only very specific ones that are worth it. So on that note, that is it for feat in Eberron Forge of the Artificer. I will be back to talk about the species next, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're kind of missing in this book. There's a few things that I'm surprised that didn't get updates from when we saw Eberron rising from the last war. So that's just an interesting thing, that this book is very focused on certain types of things from the Eberron setting. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today, and I hope you enjoy this. And until next time, have a great week.